What would you do if the people who were supposed to believe in you the most told you that you weren't worth it? And what if, 4 years later, you had the chance to prove them wrong in front of 3,000 people? My name is Eleanor Hartwell. Most people call me Ellie. I'm 23 years old, and 2 weeks ago I stood behind a curtain on a graduation stage at Caldwell University, while my heart hammered loud enough that I was sure the person beside me could hear it. The stage lights were blinding. Somewhere in the crowd I could smell fresh flowers drifting up from the front rows. My palms were soaking wet. Out in that audience, in the very first row, sat my parents. My father Gerald had his camera raised, adjusting the lens with patient concentration. My mother Diane sat beside him with a large bouquet of white roses in her arms. Between them was an empty chair, not saved for me. It never was. Every bit of that preparation was for my twin sister Sophia. They had no idea I was there. And they had absolutely no idea my name was about to be called first. We lived in Columbus, Ohio, a comfortable middle-class household that looked perfectly normal from the outside. Sophia and I were twins, but we were never treated that way. She was the sun in our family's universe, quick, charming, socially effortless. Gerald leaned into it early. He took her to networking events, invested in her confidence like a stock he believed in. I was quieter. I liked books more than parties. But in my family, quiet didn't get you noticed. Quiet just made you easy to overlook. Then came the Tuesday in April that changed everything. 2 acceptance letters arrived the same afternoon. Sophia got into Caldwell University, $68,000 a year. I got into Greystone State, $27,000. That evening Gerald called a family meeting. He settled into his leather armchair the way he did when he had a decision to announce, not discuss. "We'll cover everything for Sophia," he said. Then he turned to me. "Eleanor, we've decided not to fund your education. You're smart, but smart isn't enough. With you, there's no return on investment." I looked at my mother. She was staring at her hands. I looked at Sophia. She had picked up her phone. I stood slowly and asked the only question I could think of. "So what am I supposed to do?" My father shrugged. "Figure it out. You're resourceful." That night I didn't cry. I sat on my bedroom floor and stared at the dark ceiling. And for the first time, I understood exactly what I was to them. Not a daughter they had underestimated, a bad investment they had already written off. What my father didn't know was that decision would follow him all the way to a stage in front of 3,000 people, and when that moment came, he wouldn't be able to look away. That night on my bedroom floor wasn't the beginning of the story. It was just the moment I finally stopped pretending I hadn't already known the ending for years. The favoritism had been woven into our lives for as long as I could remember, quiet and constant, like a draft coming through a window you could never find. On our 16th birthday, my parents pulled a brand new red Honda Civic into the driveway with a bow on the hood. Sophia ran outside screaming with joy. I stood in the doorway and smiled because that's what you do. My mother said gently, "We just can't afford 2 cars right now." I didn't point out that 3 weeks later, they paid for Sophia's summer program in Barcelona, the flights, the housing, everything. Family vacations had their own version of the same lesson. On one trip to Florida, Sophia got her own hotel room with an ocean view. I ended up on a rollaway cot near the elevator bank. The hotel staff called it a cozy corner with a professional smile. In every family photo from every trip we ever took, Sophia stood center frame while I hovered near the edge, half in the shot, half out, like an afterthought nobody had fully committed to. Then came the afternoon I stopped wondering and started knowing. I was 17, standing in the kitchen, when I noticed my mother's phone unlocked on the counter. The screen showed a text thread with my Aunt Carol. My mother had written, "Ellie's smart, but she just doesn't stand out. Gerald's right. We have to be practical." I set the phone down exactly where I found it, walked to the backyard, and stood by the old wooden fence looking at nothing. I didn't cry. I just gave one slow nod, the way you do when something you've suspected for a long time finally gets confirmed. That night, I opened my cracked laptop and typed 4 words into the search bar: full scholarships for independent students. I did the math. Greystone State, $27,000 per year. 4 years. $108,000 total. My savings, $2,500. The gap was staggering. I found the Crestfield Scholarship, full tuition plus $11,000 annually for living expenses, awarded to 20 students nationwide. I laughed out loud alone in the dark. 20 students. The entire country. But I bookmarked it anyway, because hope that's small is still hope. By the time I closed the laptop, I had a survival blueprint. Wake at 4:30, work 3 jobs, sleep 4 hours, repeat for 4 years. The week before I left, Sophia posted photos from Cancun. Turquoise water, bright cocktails, everyone laughing in the sun. I was folding a second-hand comforter into a borrowed suitcase. Every night that summer, before I fell asleep, I whispered the same thing to myself. This is the price of freedom. I meant it every time. I kept that promise every single day, from the moment I arrived at Greystone, and the first real test came on a cold Thursday in November of my freshman year. My room cost $320 a month, shared with 4 others. That Thanksgiving, while campus emptied out and everyone else drove home to family dinners, I sat at my desk with instant noodles and called my mother. Her voice was warm on the surface. I asked to speak to my father. There was a pause, then I heard his voice from across the room, low and unbothered. "Tell her I'm busy." I said it was fine. Then I opened Facebook. Sophia had just posted a photo of the Thanksgiving table. Candles lit, golden turkey, white linen tablecloth. I zoomed in slowly. 3 place settings, 3 chairs, 3 plates. I counted them once, then again. 1, 2, 3. Something broke inside me that night. Quietly, the way ice cracks before it gives way. And the strangest part was what came after. Once it broke, I felt lighter, clearer. I carried that clarity into second semester, into Microeconomics 101, and into the office of Professor Catherine Moore. She had taught at Greystone for 28 years. Students called her the Ice Queen. She hadn't awarded an A+ in longer than most of them had been alive. When my first essay came back with that grade, and a note reading, "See me after class," I walked to her office certain I had done something wrong. She looked up and said simply, "Where did you learn to write like this?" Before I could stop myself, I said, "My family doesn't support my education. Not financially, and not in any other way." She set down her pen. "Tell me." So I did. For the first time in my life, I told someone the whole story. When I finished, she asked, "Have you heard of the Crestfield Scholarship?" I said 20 spots. The whole country. Impossible odds. She placed both hands flat on the desk. "Do you actually believe you have no chance, or are you afraid to try and find out?" I had no answer. It was the first time anyone had ever asked me that. What followed were 3 years of the hardest work of my life. 4.0 GPA, 6 consecutive semesters, not one missed class. Junior year, I passed out during a morning shift at the coffee shop. The doctor said, exhaustion and dehydration. I was back at work the next morning. One afternoon, I pulled into an empty parking lot in Audrey's car and cried for 20 minutes. Not because of any one thing, but because everything had been piling up so long there was nowhere left to put it. I wiped my face, started the car, and drove home. I never told anyone. As a finalist for the Crestfield, I took a 9-hour overnight bus to New York with $890 in my account and a $12 thrift store blazer. In the waiting room, a candidate looked me over from head to toe, paused at my shoes, and turned away. I looked down at those shoes, took one breath, and heard Professor Moore's voice. "You don't need to belong here. You just need to deserve to be here." 2 weeks later, at 6:52, on a Tuesday morning, the email arrived. I sat down on the sidewalk and cried until strangers stared. Then Professor Moore called. Caldwell University was a Crestfield partner school. If I transferred, I would graduate as valedictorian. I would give the commencement address, at Sophia's school, in front of everyone. I made my decision that night. I told no one in my family, not even Sophia. I transferred to Caldwell in September and moved through campus like a ghost for 3 weeks, attending classes, studying, telling no one in my family I was there. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. I was on the third floor of the library, tucked into a corner seat beside a tall window, my constitutional law textbook open in front of me. I heard footsteps slow, then stop. I looked up. Sophia was standing less than 3 feet away, a cup of iced tea in her hand, her mouth open. "Ellie? Since when?" I closed my book. "Since September." She stared. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" I looked at her evenly. "Did anyone ask?" She set her cup down and took my hand. "Do you hate us?" I looked down at her hands holding mine, then up at her face. "You can't hate people you've already let go of." I pulled my hand back gently, picked up my book, and walked to class. Sophia called our father within the hour. Gerald called me that evening. First time in 3 years. "You don't have the money for Caldwell. How are you there?" One word. Scholarship. A long silence. "What kind?" "The kind I earned myself, Dad." Then I ended the call. The weeks before graduation had their own tension. My parents booked a hotel, ordered white roses, made a dinner reservation, all for Sophia. Professor Moore asked if I wanted to notify my family about the speech. I said no. I wanted them to hear it when everyone else did. Audrey drove 4 hours from Pittsburgh to be there and helped me pick out a navy dress, the first new clothing I'd bought in 2 years that didn't come from a thrift store. "You look like a CEO," she said. I told her I felt like I was going to be sick. "That's basically the same thing, Ellie." May 19th arrived with warm sun and a sky so blue it looked painted. The stadium held 3,200 people, and by 9 o'clock it was nearly full. I entered through the faculty gate. Across my shoulders lay the gold Valedictorian sash. Pinned at my chest was the bronze Crestfield medallion catching the morning light. In the front row sat my parents, Gerald in his navy suit, camera raised, Diane in cream, white roses in her arms. Between them, an empty chair holding their coats. Not saved for me. Never once saved for me. The university president leaned into the microphone. "It is my great honor to introduce this year's Valedictorian and Crestfield Scholar. Please welcome Eleanor Hartwell." For one suspended second, nothing moved. Then I stepped out. 3,200 pairs of eyes turned at once. I walked steadily, each step deliberate. I did not look at the front row, but I felt the exact moment they saw me. My father's hands stopped on the camera. My mother's bouquet dropped to the concrete floor. I kept walking. 4 years ago, I said, my voice steady through the speakers. I was told I wasn't worth the investment. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father sat completely still. So I learned to invest in myself. I spoke about the 3 jobs, the 4 hours of sleep, the overnight bus to New York in a thrift store blazer. I am not standing here because someone believed in me. I am standing here because I learned to believe in myself. The applause built until 3,200 people were on their feet. My parents stayed seated, still, surrounded by a stadium full of people standing, like 2 figures in a photograph no one had thought to update. At the reception, Patricia Lawson, a family friend, found my mother and said warmly, "Diane, I had no idea Ellie was at Caldwell. A Crestfield scholar. You must be bursting with pride. I would have put a banner on my house." My mother smiled with pressed lips. "Yes, we're very proud." I was standing close enough to hear every word. Gerald reached me minutes later, his voice low and rough. "Why didn't you tell us?" Same answer as Sophia. "Did you ever ask?" My mother arrived in tears. "We didn't know." I kept my voice even. "You knew enough. You just chose not to look." Gerald said he was wrong and asked what he could do to fix it. "It's not my responsibility to tell you how to repair what you broke." Something crossed his face. A small, involuntary flinch. For the first time in my life, my father looked small. Not because I wanted that, because the truth had finally, fully landed. "I'm not angry," I told them both. "But I am not the same girl who walked out of your house 4 years ago." I turned and walked away. Behind me was my family. Ahead was everything I had built. For the first time in my life, I did not look back. Walking away from that reception was one thing. Living with what came after was another. 3 days later, Sophia called, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. "Mom hasn't stopped crying. Dad barely leaves his office. I've never seen him like this." I let the silence sit. I hear you, Sophia. But that's not something I can fix for them. She asked if I regretted it. I thought about it honestly. No, but I don't feel good about it either. I had walked onto that stage because I had earned the right to be there. What my parents felt afterward was the weight of their own choices catching up, and there was nothing I could do to carry that for them. The speech spread through social media within days. Gerald began receiving messages from colleagues who had seen the clip and wanted him to know how impressive his daughter was. The version of events he had always carried, the one where I was the daughter who hadn't amounted to much, had been replaced publicly and permanently with something he hadn't written and couldn't edit. I moved to New York 2 weeks after graduation. My apartment was a studio in Lower Manhattan with one window looking into a red brick wall, small enough that you could touch opposite walls if you stretched. But my name was on the lease. My key opened the door. I had paid the deposit with money I earned myself, and those facts made it feel larger than any room I had ever lived in. I started at Harrington and Cole Associates that same month. Audrey came that first weekend, looked slowly around the room, and said, "Small and depressing, exactly like I pictured." Then she hugged me until I couldn't breathe. "You did it, Elle. You actually did it." A few weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived, 4 pages in my mother's slanted blue cursive. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She just wanted me to know she saw me now, and she was sorry it had taken a stadium full of strangers to make her look. I read it twice, folded it carefully, and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't reply, not to punish her, but because I needed time to know what I wanted to say, if anything. Sophia and I started meeting for coffee once a month. The early ones were awkward, long pauses, careful words. One afternoon she told me Gerald had spent an entire evening writing a formal apology and accidentally copied the entire accounting department at his firm. We both started laughing at exactly the same moment, the kind that takes over completely, until our eyes were watering. When it faded, I realized something. That was the first time I had ever actually laughed with my sister. Gerald called, 6 months after graduation, his voice slower and more tired than I remembered. I was wrong. Not just about the money, about everything. I have no excuse for any of it. I said I knew. He asked what he could do. "If you want a real conversation, honest, no deflecting, you can call me again. I might answer, I might not, but the door is open." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a choice I was making for myself, on my own terms. My parents flew to New York the following spring and stood in my doorway in the city I had built from nothing. Awkward, tearful, uncomfortable, but they came, for me, not for Sophia, not for an occasion that required it. That meant something. That same month I wired $12,000 anonymously to the Greystone State Scholarship Fund, designated for students without family financial support. Audrey said, "You're changing someone's life." I thought about Professor Moore, about a cracked laptop at 2 in the morning, about a $55 bus ticket and a borrowed blazer. "Someone changed mine," I said. "I'm just passing it forward." This fall I begin my MBA at Columbia. Harrington and Cole are sponsoring it in full. Your worth does not live in someone else's recognition. It does not depend on whether your chair gets set at the table or your face makes it into the frame. It exists, steady and complete, whether or not a single person in the room acknowledges it. The only person who needs to see it first is you. That's where everything else begins.